9x minus 3y plus 8xy minus 3. If x equals 10 and y equals negative 2, what is the value of this expression? First, we need to substitute. 9 times x, and we're replacing x with 10. So 9 times 10 minus 3 times y, and we're replacing y with negative 2. Plus 8 times x times y, so times 10 times negative 2, minus 3. Now, we need to follow our order of operations. First would be grouping symbols, but in this case there aren't any. Next would be exponents, and again we don't have any. So after that is multiplication and division, working from left to right. Starting at the left, we have 9 times 10, which is 90, minus 3 times negative 2 plus 8 times 10 times negative 2 minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be right here. So I'm going to bring down my 90 minus 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, plus 8 times 10 times negative 2 minus 3. Our next set of multiplication would be 8 times 10. So we have 90 minus a negative 6 plus 8 times 10 is 80 times negative 2 minus 3. Then we need to multiply 80 times negative 2. So we bring down our 90 minus negative 6 plus 80 times negative 2. A positive times a negative is a negative, so negative 160 minus 3. Now that we've taken care of all the multiplication, we're now going to work with addition and subtraction, again from left to right. So starting on the left, we're going to start with 90 minus a negative 6. Minus a negative, you can think of this like you're taking away a negative, which is the same as adding a positive, or you can add the inverse. So we have 90 plus 6, 96, plus negative 160 minus 3. Again, we've got to continue working from left to right. So next we have 96 plus negative 160. These two numbers have different signs. 96 is positive, while 160 is negative. Since they have different signs, we need to subtract them. So I'll do that off to the side. 160 minus 96. So to borrow from the 6, it becomes a 5. 10 minus 6 is 4. Now borrow from the 1, it becomes a 0. So I have 15 minus 9 is 6. So 160 minus 96 is 64. And it's going to be a negative 64 because 160, or negative 160, has a larger absolute value than 96 does. So negative 64 minus 3. And the last thing we do is subtract those numbers. So if you think about where you are in the number line, you're at way over here on the left at negative 64. And then you subtract 3, so you're moving more to the left. Your number's getting even smaller. So it's negative 67. Another way to think about it is you have 64 negatives and 3 negatives. That's a total of 67 negatives. And finally, even another way to think about it is you can change it to adding the inverse. So you have negative 64 plus negative 3. Either way, you're going to get negative 67. And that's answer A. (7m plus 43 equals 160. What is the value of m? So first I'm going to rewrite my equation. 7m plus 43 equals 160. We want to know what number multiplied times 7 with 43 added to that would give us 160. And we could guess and check numbers until we found a number that would satisfy this equation. But there's a much easier and more direct way. And that is to undo the operations that are done to our variable m. We're going to start by undoing the addition of 43. So we're going to subtract 43 from both sides. And as long as we do that to both sides, we keep our equation equal and balanced. If you have something that's equal to something else, and you take away the same amount from both of those things, then they'll still be equal to each other. So we bring down the 7m. Positive 43 minus 43 is 0, so those cancel. And we bring down the equals, and then we have to subtract. And I can't take 3 from 0, so I'll borrow from the 6, that's a 5. Then I have 10 minus 3 is 7, 5 minus 4 is 1, and I bring down my 1 because 1 minus 0 is 1, so 117. Now I have to undo this 7 times m, and the opposite of multiplying times 7 is dividing by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times m is m. 117 divided by 7, I'm not sure what that is, so I'm going to divide off to the side. 7 goes into 11 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. When you subtract, you get 4. And then we bring down the 7. 7 goes into 47 6 times. 7 times 6 is 42. We subtract and we get 5. Then we add a decimal and a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 50 7 times. 7 times 7 is 49. We subtract and we get 1. We add a 0 and bring it down. 7 goes into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. And we could keep going, but really that's all I need to find my answer. The 1 tells the 7 to stay the same if we're rounding to the tenths place, so our answer is 16 7/10, which is answer choice B. What is the slope of a line with point A, -15, -4, and point B, 15, 4? To find the slope of a line, we use m for slope usually in math. The slope is the change in y divided by the change in x. And that triangle stands for change in. To find the change in y, you must subtract the y coordinates. So y2 minus y1. Likewise, to find the change in x, you must subtract the x coordinates in the same order. So x2 minus x1. Now where are these? Well, we were given 2 ordered pairs. So that means we have an x1 and a y1 and an x2 and a y2. So now we have the coordinates to substitute into our slope formula. So we'll start with y2, which is 4, minus y1, which is a -4, divided by x2, which was 15, minus x1, which is -15. And then we simplify. So we can add the inverse. and 4 plus 4 is 8, divided by, and again we can add the inverse, and 15 plus 15 is 30. Now finally we need to simplify our fraction. So we can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 30 divided by 2 is 15. So that means that our slope is 4/15, which is answer choice A. Solve for x using the following system of equations. 3y plus 10x equals 23. 18y minus 15x equals 50. There are many different ways to solve a system of equations. One is by graphing. You would graph the two lines and then see where they intersect. The solution is the ordered pair of the intersection of those lines, because the intersection is the only ordered pair that will satisfy both equations and make them both true, since it's the only point they have in common. You can also use substitution. That's where you solve for one variable and then substitute that expression into the other equation. And then there's elimination. And that's the method we're going to use now to solve for x. Since we want to solve for x, we want to eliminate y. And eliminate means to get rid of. To get rid of y, I need to multiply this whole equation by a -6. Because -6 times 3y is -18y. And then when I add my two equations together, 18y and -18y will cancel or eliminate. -6 times 10x is -60x. And -6 times 23 is negative. 6 times 20 is 120. 6 times 3 is 18, so 138. And now I need to add my two equations together. 18y and -18y is 0. They cancel. -15x and -60x is -75x. Equals -138 and 50. When I add those together, I'm going to get a negative, and I can subtract off to the side here. That's 8, and 13 minus 5 is 8, so -88. Finally, to solve for x, we need to divide both sides by -75. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 75 divided by 75 is 1, times x is x. And again, a negative divided by a negative will give me a positive. And we can divide those off to the side. 75 goes into 88 one time. 75 times 1 is 75. We subtract and we get 13. Add a decimal and a 0, bring it down. 75 goes into 130 one time. 75 times 1 is 75. Subtract, and we get 55. Add a 0 and bring it down. And 75 goes into 550, I believe, 7 times. 7 times 70 is 490. 7 times 5 is 35, so that'd be 525. We subtract and we get 25. Add a 0, bring it down. And we could keep on going, dividing until we find the end. But since this is multiple choice, we can already see which answer choice is correct. And that would be answer B, 1 17/100. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x minus 20 times the quantity 5x plus 10. To multiply these two binomials, we can use a method called FOIL. And FOIL stands for first, O stands for outer, I stands for inner, and L stands for last. So the F first means to multiply the first term in the first binomial times the first term in the second binomial. First times first. 2x times 5x. 2 times 5 is 10. And x times x is x squared. So it's 10x squared. The O again stands for outer. So that means to multiply the two outside terms. So 2x and 10 are the two terms on the outside, the outer terms. So 2x times 10, 2 times 10 is 20, 2x times 10 is 20x. I stands for inner. That means to multiply the two terms on the inside. So that would be this negative 20 times 5x. Negative 20 times 5x. A negative times a positive is a negative. 20 times 5x is 100x. Then finally, we multiply the last terms together. So that means the last term in the first set of parentheses or in the first binomial times the last term in the second binomial. Last times last. So that's negative 20 times 10, which is negative 200. A negative times a positive is a negative. We're almost done. The last thing we need to do is combine these like terms right here. 20x and negative 100x. So it's really 20x minus 100x. Bring down the 10x squared first. And 20x minus 100x would be negative 80x. Then bring down the negative 200. So looking at our answer choices, looks like answer A would be the correct answer. In the following inequality, solve for x. Negative 4x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 48. To solve for x, we need to get x alone, which means undoing the operations that are being done to x currently. And that is negative 4 times x and plus 8. So we'll start by getting rid of the plus 8. And we can get rid of it by doing the exact opposite of adding 8, subtracting 8. And if we subtract 8 from the left side of our inequality symbol, then we must also subtract 8 from the right side to keep it even. So we bring down our negative 4x. A positive 8 minus 8 is 0, is greater than or equal to 48 minus 8 is 40. And we're almost done. Now we need to undo negative 4 times x. And the opposite of multiplying by a negative 4 is dividing by a negative 4. Now with inequalities, there is a special rule you have to remember. And that is, if you divide both sides by a negative number, or you multiply both sides by a negative number, you have to flip the sign. So now instead of greater than or equal to, our sign is now a less than or equal to sign. And again, that's because we divided both sides by a negative number. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 is 1, and 1 times x is x. 40 divided by negative 4, a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 40 divided by 4 is 10. So x is less than or equal to negative 10. Answer D. Calculate the point of intersection for the following lines. 6x plus 3y equals 24, and 5y minus 10 equals 15x. There are a few different methods for finding the intersection of two lines. One is graphing. And you can just graph the two lines and find where they meet. Sometimes, though, that can be hard, especially when your answers look like this. You can also use elimination, or, like we're going to do on this problem, you can use substitution. And in order to substitute, I need to solve for one of my variables. Looking at my two equations, it looks like it's going to be pretty easy to get y alone in this second equation. And I'll do it in two steps. First, we add 10 to both sides. Bring down the 5y. Negative 10 plus 10 is 0. Equals, these are not like terms, so just write them down. Then we need to divide everything by the coefficient of y, which is 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1, times y is y, equals 15x divided by 5 is 3x, and 10 divided by 5 is 2, so plus 2. Now that I've solved for y, I can substitute this expression, 3x plus 2, in my other equation for y. So I'm going to substitute that right there, which means that I now have 6x plus 3 times, instead of y, I'm replacing it with the expression 3x plus 2 equals 24. And now we need to solve for x by first distributing. So 6x plus 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times 2 is 6, so plus 6 equals 24. Next, we need to combine like terms. 6x plus 9x is 15x. Plus 6 equals 24. Then, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So 15x equals 18. And finally, we need to divide both sides by the coefficient of x, 15. That's 1 times x is x equals 18 divided by 15. We can do that right over here. 15 goes into 18 one time. That's 15. Subtract and you get 3. Add a decimal and a 0. Bring it down. And 15 goes into 30 two times. So 1 2/10. Now we're halfway there. And once you find x, it actually gets a whole lot easier to find y. Now that we know what x equals, we can use this expression, or this equation, y equals 3x plus 2, and simply substitute what x is into this equation, and we'll have y. So I'm going to replace x with 1 2/10. So y equals 1 2/10 times 3 is 3 6/10 plus 2. So y equals 5 6/10. Finally, we need to put both of these coordinates together as an ordered pair. X is 1 2/10 and y is 5 6/10, which means our answer is C. What is the midpoint of points A, negative 20, 8, and B, 5, 3. To find the midpoint, we can use the midpoint formula, which is x1 plus x2 divided by 2, then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And if you look closely, you'll notice what you're doing is you're adding your endpoint x coordinates together and dividing by 2. That's an average, or the middle of those two numbers. So it makes sense that if you're trying to find the midpoint, that you would find the middle of your x coordinates and then also the middle of your y coordinates. And then you'll end up with a midpoint. So now I'm going to label my ordered pairs x1, y1, and x2, y2. So that now I can substitute. So my midpoint is x1 is negative 20 and x2 is 5. So negative 20 plus 5 divided by 2. And then I'll add my y's and divide by 2. So 8 plus 3 divided by 2. And now we just need to simplify. Negative 20 plus 5 is negative 15 divided by 2. And 8 plus 3 is 11 divided by 2. Negative 15 divided by 2, that's a negative divided by a positive, that's a negative. And it's negative 7.5. And then 11 divided by 2 is positive 5.5. So that is answer choice D. Solve for x in the following inequality. 4x plus 23 is greater than negative 3x minus 6. The first thing we want to do is get all of our x terms on the same side of the inequality. I'm going to do this by adding 3x to both sides. 4x plus 3x is 7x. Bring down the plus 23 and bring down the greater than sign. Negative 3x plus 3x, those are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the negative 6. Next, we want to remove 23. The opposite of adding 23 is subtracting 23. So subtract 23 from both sides. Bring down the 7x. Plus 23 and negative 23 are additive inverses, so they cancel. Bring down the greater than sign. Negative 6 and negative 23, they have the same signs, they're both negative, which means our answer is negative, and we just add the numbers together. 23 plus 6 is 29, so it's negative 29. Finally, we have to divide both sides by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. Bring down the greater than sign. And then the first thing I'll do is change this into a mixed number, since I can't actually divide negative 29 by 7 and get an integer. So 7 goes into negative 29 4 times. So it's negative 4. 4 times 7 is 28. So that means that there's 1 left over out of 7. So it's negative 4 and 1/7. X is greater than negative 4 and 1/7. Now if we look at the answers, you'll see that all the answers are in decimal form. And we can find out what 1/7 is as a decimal by dividing. So 7 doesn't go into 1, so we'll have to put a decimal here, which means bring a decimal to the top and add a 0 to it. 7 does go into 10 one time. 7 times 1 is 7. We subtract and we get 3. Add another 0, bring it down, and 7 goes into 30 4 times. 7 times 4 is 28. We subtract and we get 2. And we can stop there because all of our answers stop at the hundredths place as well. So we could write this as x is greater than -4 and 14 hundredths, which is answer choice A. The quantity y plus 10 squared minus 625 equals 0. Solve for y. The first thing we want to do is add 625 to both sides, because doing that is going to help us get y alone and thus solve for it. So we bring down our quantity y plus 10 squared. Negative 625 plus 625 is 0, so that just cancels out. And that equals 0 plus 625, which is 625. Well, then we want to get rid of this squared because our y is kind of locked in those parentheses. So to unlock them, we want to do the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting. So we square root both sides. And the square root and the square undo each other. They're the exact opposites of each other. So they cancel each other out, and we're just left with y plus 10 equals, and when I take the square root of 625, I get plus or minus 25. And that's because a positive 25 squared would give me 625, but also a negative 25 squared would give me 625. So we really have two answers there. So we write it with a plus or minus. And finally, to solve for y, we need to subtract 10 from both sides. So we have y plus 10 minus 10 is 0, so equals negative 10 plus or minus 25. We have two answers, and to find them, we just need to simplify. So we have y equals negative 10 plus 25, and y equals negative 10 minus 25. All I did was separate the plus or the minus into two separate expressions. Negative 10 plus 25 is 15, while negative 10 minus 25 is negative 35. So our solutions are that y is 15 or negative 35, which is answer D. On a 6-sided die, each side has a number between 1 and 6. What is the probability of throwing a 3 or a 4? This die has 6 sides, so that means our total is 6, which is the denominator of our fraction for finding our probability. We want to know what the probability of throwing a 3 or, and that is a key word, 3 or a 4. So if it lands on either one of those, we're good. So that's two different numbers that we could land on out of our 6 different numbers. And then of course we can simplify our fraction by dividing the numerator and the denominator both by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, so it's 1 in 3. Or, written like this, a 1 in 3 chance. In the following equation, solve for x by factoring. 2x squared minus 7x equals x squared minus 12. In order to factor, we need to get all of our terms on the same side. So that means subtracting an x squared from both sides, so that we have x squared now minus 7x, and then adding 12 to both sides. So now this is plus 12 equals 0. Now we're ready to factor. So I have a binomial and a binomial equals 0. I know my first two terms are going to be, or my first term in each binomial, because x times x gives me x squared. To find these second numbers in each binomial, these numbers must be factors of 12 that add to be negative 7. Let's start by looking at the factors of 12. 1 and 12 are factors of 12. 2 and 6 are factors of 12. And also 3 and 4 are factors of 12. Now again, these numbers have to add to give us a negative 7, while also multiplying to give us a positive 12. The only way these numbers can do both those things is if they're both negative. Because a negative times a negative will give us the positive 12, but when we add the two negatives together, we'll get our negative 7. So negative 1 and negative 12, that's negative 13, not negative 7. Doesn't work. Negative 2 and negative 6 is negative 8, not negative 7. Doesn't work. But negative 3 and negative 4 does give me negative 7. So I found my numbers, negative 3 and negative 4. And then if you just FOIL, you can check your answer to see if it's correct. So we do first times first, x times x, x squared. Outer, x times negative 4 is negative 4x. Then the inner, negative 3 times x, negative 3x. So you have negative 4x plus negative 3x, which is the middle term, negative 7x. And then finally the last, negative 3 times negative 4, which is a positive 12. So now we've checked and we know that we factored correctly. But we still haven't solved for x. Here we have two expressions that we're multiplying together, and that gives us 0. The only way you can multiply two numbers together and get 0 is if one of them is 0. So that means that either x minus 3 must be 0 or x minus 4 must be 0. And now we just solve each equation. So add 3 and 3. Those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 3. Or add 4 and add 4, and those cancel because they're additive inverses, and x equals 4. So that means x equals 3 and 4, which is answer B. Simplify the following expression. 16m to the 16th, y to the 4th, z to the 6th, divided by 8m to the 8th, y squared, z cubed, all raised to the 4th power. First, we want to simplify before we raise to the 4th power. So we're going to start with dividing 16 by 8, which is 2. Then m to the 16th divided by m to the 8th is m to the 16 minus 8. Since when you divide like bases, you subtract the exponents. Y to the 4th divided by y squared is y to the 4 minus 2. And z to the 6th divided by z cubed is z to the 6 minus 3. Now we need to simplify our exponents. So we have 2m to the 16 minus 8, 8, y to the 4 minus 2, 2, and z to the 6 minus 3, 3. We have to be very careful to not forget that all of this is supposed to be raised to the 4th power. So we're not done yet. Now we need to raise everything inside our parentheses to the 4th power. So we'll start with 2 to the 4th. Then we have m to the 8th raised to the 4th. We're raising a power to a power, so we must multiply our exponents. So m to the 8 times 4 is 32. Y to the 2 times 4 is 8. And z to the 3 times 4 is 12. Finally, we need to simplify 2 to the 4th. 2 to the 4th means to multiply 2 times itself 4 times. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So 2 times itself 4 times is 16. M to the 32nd, y to the 8th, z to the 12th. So our answer is answer choice D. If 2x plus 5x equals 3x plus x plus 30, what is the value of x? So first I'm going to combine like terms on both sides of the equal sign. On the left side, I can combine 2x plus 5x to give me 7x. Bring down this equal sign, and on the right side, we can combine 3x plus x. So 3x plus another x gives us 4x. And then bring down the plus 30. Next, we need to get all of our x terms on the same side of the equal sign. We'll do this by subtracting 4x from both sides. 7x minus 4x is 3x. Bring down the equals. 4x minus 4x cancels. They're additive inverses. And we bring down the positive 30. Finally, we need to divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 1 times x is simply x. So x equals 30 divided by 3, which is 10. And that's answer choice D. What is the value of x? In x squared plus 12x plus 36 equals 0. We need to find what number we could substitute for x that would make this equation true. And there's more than one way to do this. One way would be to use the quadratic equation, which is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And the a, b, and c, those are just the coefficients of your, a is the coefficient of your x squared term, b is the coefficient of your x term, and the c is your constant. But there is another way to solve this that may even be a little bit easier than using the quadratic equation, and that is to factor. So I'm going to factor this trinomial into a binomial times a binomial. I know that x times x is x squared. What I need to find out is what my second numbers are in each set of parentheses. And these two numbers need to have a product of 36 and a sum of 12. And the only two numbers that have a product of 36 and a sum of 12 are 6 and 6. And you can always FOIL what you factored to check and see if it is in fact correct. So you could multiply x times x, and that's x squared. That's your first terms. Outer x times 6, 6x. Inner 6 times x, 6x. And last, 6 times 6, 36. Then you combine like terms, x squared plus 12x plus 36. And we can see that we did factor correctly, because whenever I FOILed my binomials back out, I got what I started with. So now what we have is that some number times another number is 0. And the only way you can multiply numbers together and get 0 is if at least one of your numbers is 0. That means that either this number, x plus 6, has to be 0, or this number, x plus 6, has to be 0. And now we just need to solve our equations. To solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals -6. Or, again, to solve for x, we need to subtract 6 from both sides. So we have x equals -6. That means that x is either -6 or it's -6. And you can substitute that solution back in for x and check to see that it really does work. So that's -6 squared plus 12 times -6 plus 36. And what I want to know is, does that equal 0? -6 squared and -6 times a -6 is 36. Plus 12 times -6 is -72. Plus 36. And again, I want to know if that equals 0. 36 and 36 is 72 plus -72. And I need to know if that equals 0. 72 plus a -72 is in fact 0. 0 does equal 0. So we can see that we solved our equation correctly. We found the value of x, -6. Simplify the following expression. The quantity 2x squared plus 3 times the quantity 2x minus 1. To simplify, we need to FOIL. The F in FOIL stands for first. So we're going to take the first term in our first binomial and multiply it times the first term in our second binomial. First and first. 2x squared times 2x. 2 times 2 is 4. X squared times x is x cubed. Next we do O, which stands for outer. So those are the two terms on the outside, which would be 2x squared and -1. So 2x squared times a -1 is -2x squared. Then our inner terms are the two terms on the inside, 3 times 2x, which is a positive 6x. And then finally, our last terms. So the last term in the first set of parentheses and the last term in the second set of parentheses. 3 times -1, which is -3. Then we'd want to look and see if we had any like terms to combine, and we don't. We have a cubic x term, a squared x term, an x term, and then just a constant. So that's our answer, which matches answer choice A. X squared plus x equals 42. What is the value of x? We need to find what numbers or number will make this equation true. And there are a couple of different options we have, really. But I'm going to show you how to solve for x by factoring. If I want to factor, then the first thing I need to do is move this 42 to the other side. So subtract 42 from both sides of the equation. So I have x squared plus x minus 42 equals 42 minus 42 is 0. Now I'm ready to factor this trinomial. So I start with my parentheses for my two binomials. And I know that the first term of each parentheses is going to be an x, because x times x is x squared. And then to find my second terms, I need to find two numbers that multiply to give me negative 42 and add to give me a positive 1, because 1 is the coefficient of x. And the two numbers that would multiply to give me a negative 42 and add to give me a positive 1 are 7 and negative 6. 7 times negative 6 is negative 42, and 7 plus negative 6 is a positive 1. You can always check your factoring by foiling. X times x is x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. Plus 7x is x, and 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. What I have now is that some number, and I don't know what it is because I don't know what x is yet, but some number times another number is 0. And the only way to multiply two numbers together and get 0 is if one of your numbers is 0. Which means either x plus 7 has to be 0 or x minus 6 has to be 0. And then we just solve for x in each equation. So to solve for x on this one, we need to subtract 7 from both sides. Bring down the x. Plus 7 minus 7 is 0. Bring down your equals. 0 minus 7 is negative 7. Or to solve for x in our second equation, we need to add 6 to both sides. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0, so x equals 0 plus 6 is 6, which means x is negative 7 or it is 6, and that's answer C. A rectangular prism measures 12 centimeters by 3 centimeters by 9 centimeters. What is its volume? The formula for volume for a rectangular prism is volume equals length times width times height. And we were given those dimensions: length, width, and height. And really it doesn't matter which one is the length, which one's the width, and which one's the height, since we're just going to multiply those three numbers together anyway. So the volume is 12 centimeters times 3 centimeters times 9 centimeters. And it's up to you which two you choose to multiply together first. You could start with 12 times 3. 3 times 2 is 6. And 3 times 1 is 3. So 12 centimeters times 3 centimeters is 36 centimeters squared times 9 centimeters. So then you could take 36 times 9. 9 times 6 is 54. 9 times 3 is 27. Plus 5 is 32. So 36 centimeters squared times 9 centimeters is 324 centimeters cubed, which is answer choice C. Simplify 9x times the quantity 3x squared plus 2x minus 9. To simplify, we need to distribute the 9x to all the terms inside the parentheses. And what that means is we have to multiply. So we multiply first 9x times 3x squared. 9 times 3 is 27. X times x squared is x cubed. Plus 9x times 2x, 9 times 2 is 18, x times x is x squared minus 9x times 9. 9 times 9 is 81x. And that would be answer choice B. 27x cubed plus 18x squared minus 81x. So remember that when you multiply x times x squared, you're adding the exponents. And that's where the x cubed comes from. X times x, again, you're adding those exponents, and those have an imaginary exponent of a 1, both of them. So x to the first times x to the first is x squared. You add the exponents, 1 plus 1. And then 9x times 9 is 81x, or negative 81x because of the minus in front of the 9. If x divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35, what is the value of x? I'm going to start by writing this problem. X divided by 3 plus 7 equals 35. The first thing we want to do is subtract 7 from both sides, because a positive 7 and a negative 7 are additive inverses of each other, and they cancel. So on the left side, we're left with x divided by 3. And on the right side, 35 minus 7 is 28. The opposite of dividing by 3 is multiplying by 3. So now we need to multiply both sides by 3. If you put this 3 over 1, now you're multiplying two fractions together, and the numerator and this denominator cross cancel. And you're simply left with x divided by 1, which is just x. So now if we determine what 28 times 3 is, we'll have our answer. 3 times 8 is 24, so write the 4 and carry the 2. And 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So that means that x is 84, which is answer C. Which of the following lines is perpendicular to the line y equals negative 5x plus 27? Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. The slope in this equation is negative 5. Because this equation is in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, where the m is the slope. So the slope of this line is negative 5. The slope of a line that's perpendicular to this line would have an opposite reciprocal slope. Opposite meaning opposite sign. So instead of negative, the slope will be positive. And then reciprocal, meaning simply to flip the fraction. So this is 5 over 1. The reciprocal would be 1/5. And again, it's a positive 1/5 because it has to be the opposite. So negative 5 over 1, the opposite reciprocal is positive 1/5. Looking at the answer choices, the only line with a slope of positive 1/5 is answer choice C. So that's the line that's perpendicular to our original line. Solve for y in the following inequality. Negative 2y is greater than or equal to 24 plus 6. So the first thing we want to do is combine these like terms, 24 plus 6. So we have negative 2y is greater than or equal to, and 24 plus 6 is 30. To solve for y, we need to divide by a negative 2. Since we have negative 2 times y, To undo that and get y alone, we divide both sides by -2. -2 divided by -2 is 1, and 1 times y leaves us with just y. Now, since we divided both sides by a negative, we have to flip our inequality sign. It was greater than or equal to, so now it's less than or equal to. And 30 divided by a -2, a positive number divided by a negative number is a negative number, and 30 divided by 2 is 15. That means that y is less than or equal to -15, which is answer choice C. Simplify the following expression. The square root of 3 times the quantity 5 square roots of 3 minus the square root of 12 plus the square root of 10. Since there is no operator between the square root of 3 and the parentheses, like there's no addition sign or subtraction sign or division sign, it's understood to be multiplication. So I'm multiplying the square root of 3 times all of these terms inside my parentheses, which means we're going to use the distributive property. So I'll start by multiplying the square root of 3 times 5 square roots of 3. So that's 5 times, and then the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is the square root of 9, which is 3. So that's 5 times 3. The square root of 3 times the negative square root of 12 is the negative square root of, and you just multiply your numbers under the square root. So 3 times 12 is 36. And then the square root of 3 times the square root of 10. So again, we're just multiplying our numbers under the radical. 3 times 10 is 30, so the square root of 30. But we're not finished yet because we have some simplifying that we can do. 5 times 3 is 15 minus the square root of 36 is 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. Plus, now 30. You want to break down that number and see if there is any part of it that we can take the square root of. So to break it down, you can just do a factor tree. 30 is 3 times 10, 3 is prime, and 10 is 2 times 5, and those are both prime. So I have no pairs of numbers and no perfect square factors, so I can't take the square root of any part of 30. So it has to be left as just the square root of 30. And finally, we can subtract 15 minus 6, since those are like terms, and we get 9. So 9 plus the square root of 30. So our answer is A. The length of a square is 15 centimeters. What is its area? Well, a square is a type of rectangle. And the formula for area of a rectangle is area equals the length times the width, or base times height. But what's special about a square is that its length and width are the same. So if we're told that the length is 15 centimeters, then that means the width is 15 centimeters as well. So we substitute 15 centimeters for the length and 15 centimeters for the width. So 15 times 15. 15 times 15, can multiply that out over here. 5 times 5 is 25. Write the 5, carry the 2. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. Get rid of that, put your 0 placeholder. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 1 is 1. Then we add these up. 5 and 0 is 5. 7 plus 5 is 12. Write the 2, carry the 1. And 1 plus 1 is 2. So 15 times 15 is 225. And centimeters times centimeters is centimeters squared. So the area of a square with length 15 centimeters is 225 centimeters squared, which is answer choice D. Simplify the following expression. 2x to the 4th, y to the 7th, m squared, z, times 5x squared, y cubed, m to the 8th. I'm going to start by multiplying my like terms together. So I can rewrite this. It's multiplication, so you can multiply in any order you want. So I'm going to multiply 2 times 5 together. And then I've got this x to the 4th times the x squared. And then we have y to the 7th times y cubed. And then we have m squared times m to the 8th. And then finally we just have this z, so times z. And now we'll simplify each one of these. So 2 times 5 is 10. And so right now you could already eliminate answer choice B because we're multiplying. We're not adding 2 and 5 together, we're multiplying. And then we get to our x's, x to the 4th times x squared. And what that really is, x to the 4th means x times itself 4 times, while x squared means x times itself 2 times. So when we multiply x to the 4th times x squared, we're multiplying x times itself a total of 6 times. So it's x to the 6th. You can see what we end up doing is adding those exponents together. And it's the same thing with y to the 7th times y cubed. Let's look at that one a little differently. So y to the 7th times y cubed. Y to the 7th is y times itself 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times y cubed. So times 1, 2, 3. So what we end up with is y times itself a total of 10 times. So y to the 7th times y cubed is y to the 10th. Or again, we're adding those exponents. Then we have m squared times m to the 8th. So same concept. Again, we're going to add our exponents. And we get m to the 10th. And then finally, times z. So that means our answer is D. 10, x to the 6th, y to the 10th, m to the 10th, z.